Andrea gave me this, the title, The Universe of Borges. I hadn't thought of it that way. And it's a gift. It's a wonderful title because it makes one thing. There's this Borges story that creates a universe, and you think, oh, well, I'm understanding. This is an allegory of, or a metaphor of our universe. And then you realize that it isn't, that it is an alternative. It's a literary universe which is perfect, whereas ours is chaotic and complex. So that's one way of the universe. But I think what she had in mind was the universe of Borges, what was in his literary universe. It is very much a literary universe. And we'll see as we go along, but there's a lot of other literature. It's a literary universe that does refer greatly to the world of literature. We'll see how it goes. My own title was, if we can go to the next slide.
Sorry, I think we need to start.
Yeah.
There.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I had something that I'd forgotten to say. It is, as we shall see, largely a literary universe. The question is it a reflection of the universe or something added to the world? Una cosa más agregada al mundo. And that's something that is well bearing in mind, that literature is not a direct reflection and cannot be a direct reflection of the world, any more than language can be a transparent reflection of the world. These are things that sort of were staple or in 19th century, early 20th century aesthetics, way of seeing the world, and which Borges, not alone, but Borges has reshaped. We'll come to that in a minute. If we could go to reading Borges, the next slide. Mm-hmm. And I read here, as you can see, he's being read from many perspectives as a writer of the fantastic, a realist writer, nationalist or criollo, cosmopolitan, apolitical, metaphysical, modernist, postmodernist, postcolonial. The list is long. How we read Borges may be taken as a barometer of our cultural and social political scene. So when I started off, one read Borges to show that his world was a world of unreality, irreality. Now, increasingly, we can see references to reality. It was supposed to be an apolitical world. Now, increasingly, we can see references to the politics that lie behind his working. So when there was a death of the author, we stopped reading him autobiographically. With postmodernism, we're reading him in the postmodernist way. So I think the point is made. It's a long history of reading Borges, and there are changes and developments in them. Next slide. The next slide, yeah. I'll read here. It's arguably, he is the most celebrated intellectual writer of abstract fiction. What was I going to say about this? I can't think of it now. That his fame has just grown. It's sort of, he is almost a de rigueur reference in talking about literature, in literary reviews. And I just recently came across something that's been written, not only last week, I think. Reading the work of Jorge Luis Borges for the first time is like discovering a new letter in the alphabet or a new note in the musical scale. If we want to unpin that, it just shows that which I am going to be arguing throughout, that he has reshaped not only the way Spanish is spoken and certainly the way Spanish is written and in literature, but he has reshaped the way in which we approach the world through literature. He's reshaped the history of literature. Over the decades since his death in 1870, Borges' global stature has continued to grow. I'm always amazed. I always think sort of the bubble will burst and somebody will say, no, he wasn't that great. Instead of which, he is seen as increasingly a great writer. Today, one could consider Borges the most important writer of the 20th century, says Susan Jo Levine, and she is the translator of the Penguin Classics. Yeah. So, next one, please. just to show his importance, I wanted a picture of Borges, and I came across this. On the day of his death, Google brought out this picture as the image of the day. You know that every day they open up their engine or whatever it is to a different picture, and Borges was chosen. I think that is quite an accolade to be the image of the day of Google. And of course, in this image, we're going to see lots of things that we associate with Borges. We'll come to those in a minute, but it's the labyrinth and the library and whatever. If we could go to the next one. There's a Borges Center. It's the American spelling. I'm sorry about that. Andrea wanted to alter it, but we couldn't. And why I'm showing that, if you can see, I didn't realize it would be able to see, but all these books here on that shelf, can you see them, are the edition of the Variaciones Borges, which has been going for many, many years. It comes out twice a year, and increasingly, it's increasing in volume. More and more people write in, and it's dedicated entirely and exclusively to the work of Borges. Again, that is a measure of his continuing fame and appeal. We now come, can we slide?
Yeah.
We come to two pictures that were too sweet to take out. I didn't want them, but they got in by mistake, and that's Borges as a child. But I wanted the next one, which is with his parents, because Borges and his family and the nuclear family, and then with the grandmothers or whatever, was a very important topic in his writing and in his thinking. There's his mother, Doña Leonora Acevedo Borges, and she was, I'll come to her in a minute, a domineering figure in his life. She was traditional, Catholic, Hispanic, like I said, domineering. And Borges, of course, rebelled against her, but it wasn't much good because she was in his life until she died at the age of 99. And when she was 99, she said to Borges, "I so would love to reach 100. And he said, "Mother, why are you so wedded to the decimal system?" I was hoping you would laugh at this because
you cannot hear whatever they're doing. You cannot hear.
Oh, I see. I see. Oh, that is a shame. It's sort of like speaking to a black ball, because what it does is not just his humor and his quip or whatever, but also he just shows how we impose systems on reality which have no intrinsic value other than for themselves. Anyhow, that was the mother. I said too much about her because I think I've got other slides. The father was Guillermo Borges, and he was, in a way, a failed writer. So he sort of put his ambition of being a writer onto Borges. But before that, he was actually the most important influencing figure in his life. As Borges many times said, all I've learned was in my father's library. And his father's library and his father's conversation with him were about metaphysical idealism. So from early on, he had a way of approaching the world not as a reality, but from the point of view of metaphysical idealism. Do you understand? Oh, I see, I can't, well, I better explain what I understand by metaphysical idealism. And that is, say, Bishop Berkeley, only what I see exists. To exist is to be seen, to be perceived. So it's a subjective way of looking at the world. And there is no reality outside of our own subjectivity. If you, as a child, approach the world like that, it does influence you. It certainly does influence you. His sister did lovely drawings. She's here, and there is Borges. Okay, shall we go to the next one?
Yeah.
He was born in 1899, and he died in 1986 in Geneva. I like to open this. I like to build upon the 1899 in saying sort of it's a Janus-like moment, because it looks backward to the last century or the history and forward to the new. And that's very much Borges. He's steeped in tradition, but then he does something new with that tradition. I already talked about his mixed ancestry, the Hispanic traditional Catholic believer, his mother, the half English free-thinking skeptic, his father. Now, on his father's side, he had a paternal grandmother called Fanny Haslam, from whom he learned English and the Bible. Borges was very well steeped and knowledgeable about the Bible, the Old Testament. The mother came from Methodist stock, and she read a lot of, taught him a lot from the Bible. On both sides, mother and father, he's linked to history, the history of Argentina, the statesmen, patricians, swordspeople, Coronel Suarez, etc., etc. So that again is that Borges roots himself in something, in Argentine history, and then all goes somewhere else. Bilingualism, I'll just say something because I've already mentioned bilingualism, but the importance of it. I'm just showing how he approached the world with metaphysical idealism, but the importance of bilingualism. Most of us who were brought up in Argentina were brought up bilingual, trilingual, if not tetralingual, and we're not the genius that Borges was. So I'm not making a causal connection. I'm just saying that from an early on stage, he knew that the thing out there in the garden could be referred to árbol when he was talking to one grandmother and tree to the other. So he knew that the relationship between language and the world was arbitrary, not absolute. Next one. About the mother. I think I went on ahead of myself and I said everything that I had to say. I'll just flesh out the very dominant bit. When she thought that he would be alone if she died, she arranged his first marriage to somebody whom he had met when he was young, and she got married to someone else and became a widow, and I think Leonor thought that would be a good match for him. And they got married, but it was a short-lived match from 1967 to 8 because they were unhappy. They were both unhappy. And she suddenly said, well, I'm not going anywhere. So she got rid of this wife and took over once more and then stayed with him until the age of 99. But there are a lot of complaints from his girlfriends about the influence that she had on Borges. But the main influence, a main early influence was his, as I said before, his father's library. And that's, he's had a lasting love of library. I think we've done all this, and we'll see about the library in another slide. If we could go to Europe. In 1914, the family traveled to Europe. It was to see whether anything could be done about his father's failing eyesight. And the war broke out, so they took refuge in Geneva. And Borges was very happy in that city, to the extent that he then would choose to die in this formative city. In Geneva, of course, he went to school and learned French at the Collège de Genève, but he taught himself German, and he entered the world of German expressionism, and that was, again, a formative experience in his life. He made a close friendship with two Jewish youngsters, Maurice Abramovich and I can't remember his first name, Hitchlinsky. And again, they stayed with him, and that opened another world, from the Catholic world from his grandmother and the Methodist world from his other grandmother to the Jewish world of Abramovich and Hitchlinsky. And I have a particular interest in Borges and Judaism, but I won't, not for today. Literary trajectory. He returned to Buenos Aires via Spain in 1921, and then he started writing mainly short prose pieces and poetry. And it is said, no, he says that he wrote his collection of poems. He just would put them in people's overcoats in a editorial, and just leave them there for free and hope that some of them would read them, and so it was. But it was a very, very small beginning when we think of the fame that we've already talked about now. He discovered via Spain again, but in Argentina, the avant-garde, and there became part of the literary scene. He wrote poetry, contributed an literary magazine. Some of you may know about Prisma and Proa. Now, these, before that, these poems, early poems that he wrote, that he put in people's overcoats and whatever, and then published, he was very ashamed of later on. He changed his political stance. So what he did, as a very Borgesian thing to do, and I'll come to the word Borgesian in a minute, was he edited his complete works, obras completas. And he did that in order to leave out these early poems, these early Marxist, communist inspired poems. I can't bear it not to have a reaction from you. It's terrible. I didn't know it was going to be like that. Oh my goodness. A bit of self-advertisement. Next one, please. Here. Sorry, but that is by me. And what I wanted to say, other than to advertise myself, and to say that in here there are all sorts of topics that I have discussed, just to give you the depth and breadth of the way in which one can approach Borges, and that's just sort of not even the tip of an iceberg. But there's one word that I want you, or actually two, that I'd like you to focus on, and one is pleasures, the first one, and the other one is hidden. And there's something about the pleasure. The pleasure is because I'm going to, and I hope I'm not making him sound too heavy, because he really, really, the uppermost layer of reading Borges is that he has a light touch, a humorous touch, an impish sense of humor. You don't guffaw, but you chuckle when you read him. And the second one is that a lot of the pleasures in reading him are hidden. So when you discover this, it's a particular joy. And I've been having that joy now. I first read Borges, I'll tell you about that later, when I was in my late teens. And I can't tell you how many decades ago that is, but you work it out. Next one. I'm coming to 1938, a pivotal year in Borges's life. It was when his father took very ill and then died. And when his father took ill, he saw that he was compelled to earn a living. So he took a job in a library, a Miguel Canet library, a suburban library. And he was very happy working. It seems right to him to work in a library. Somebody once came and said something to him, and this person said, you know, there's a writer who's also called Borges, not thinking that it would ever be the same one. Okay. In 1938 as well, he suffered an accident. He was going up a flight of stairs, and there was an open window, and the metal window, and he hit against this window and developed septicemia. And he was hallucinating for over a week, and as he thought, on his deathbed. And then when he recovered, to test himself, he thought he would do something that he hadn't ever done before. He would write his first real fiction. And if it was a failure, it didn't really matter, because he'd never done it before, and it was just a failure. It happened to be one of the most important fictions that he's done. Pierre Bernard, author of Don Quixote. And now I really can't bear not to see it, but I'm going to go to the gallery to see whether anyone is, no, I can't do this. Anyhow, I better leave things alone. Anyone is laughing? Anyone laughing here?
We can
smiling.
We can move the.
No, it's okay. Don't.
We can close the presentation.
No. It's okay. Don't worry about it. No, what I want to say is that obviously we are all here aware that Pierre Menard was not the author of Don Quixote, but with new students nowadays, I don't get a laugh or a smile or an irony or anything here, because they just say, oh, well, he must have written Don Quixote. So that, oh, one laugh, lovely, lovely, lovely. Okay, Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote, I think that deserves its own talk, because it's a wonderful, wonderful story. But basically, Pierre Menard wants to write the Quixote. He doesn't want to remember the Quixote. He wants to be Pierre Menard, a minor symbolist poet in Nîmes, and write Don Quixote. To get there from where he is, not from where Cervantes was. I won't go on about this now, but it is, do read it, if you can, do read it. It's a lovely, lovely story. Next one, salient characteristics. Oh, I see. Sorry, can you do the next one, please? Oh, you've done it. Sorry. I hope I get a smile here as well with the absolute disbelief in absolutes.
We are smiling.
Sorry?
Yes, we are smiling.
You are smiling. Good for you. God, good for you. It's just, well, it just struck me because he really is very much consistently anti-absolutist, and you'll see that as with more things that I'll say. But everything has another side. Nothing is ever left alone. Every story will somewhere have un punto de escape, a place of a vanishing point into the opposite argument or another argument. So this is a disbelief in absolutes, in all absolutism, same politically, of course, as well. But the absolute disbelief in absolute is a paradox, and that is an absolute, very important component or literary component of Borges' fiction, the use of paradox. As he has said, if I'm rich in anything, it is in perplexities, not in certainties. Now, that is something very much, he said it a long time ago, he said it in the 30s, I think, but now the idea of that of a perplexity being a richness, the hybrid being a richness, speaking from the margins being a richness, is something that we associate with postmodernism and not with the era in which he wrote. He comes from a tradition, from an aesthetic, of positivism and late positivism and science. What we don't know, the universe is knowable. What we don't know, we can know. Whereas we now know that we can't know. That it's illusory to think that we can know. I'm coming to some essential conceits in Borges. Can we go there? Can we go to the next one? Yeah. These are words that are very important in his writings. They appear a lot. The first one is the idea of the labyrinth. That's the most important, to such an extent that when Gallimard brought out his collected fiction, the first one, he called it Labyrinthe, and now in Labyrinth in the Penguin edition. Borges never wrote a collection called Labyrinth. So when you say, I've read Borges' Labyrinth, it means you've just read stories in that collection. There is, perversely, no story called The Labyrinth, but The Labyrinth is something very important in his fiction, and we'll see in a minute why. The library is another one. I think I've talked about that, and we'll see more pictures. Mirrors, because like with paradox, with what I've said, mirrors give you a reflection, and it's not a perfect reflection. It's between the one and the other. And mirrors add to the illusory nature of the world, because what you see in a mirror is illusory, really. It's not the reality. Daggers, knife fights, hoodlums, all that. You don't think about Borges in those terms, perhaps, but he loved all that. Compadritos and knife fights, as I said here. Tigers was a personal thing of his, and the use of paradox I've already spoken about. you can add to these a lot of other essential conceits, but these are I think, the most important ones. If we go to the first one, the labyrinth. Yeah, thanks to Andrea, you've got a really good image of this labyrinth. Not only is it pretty, but it illustrates what Borges said about being in the world. We are in the world as if we were in a labyrinth. We are lost, disorientated. We can't find, there is a center, but we can't find it. And that is the whole sort of the drama, the trauma, the whatever of being in the world. And yet, if we were above the labyrinth, you could see exactly how to go out and what to do. So if there is a God, there may be a God, and the God would be above the labyrinth, and we would see the order. But we in the labyrinth don't. And that brings us to another theme in Borges, and that is the interplay between chaos and order. And you always find that in literature there may be order, in life there is chaos. Another labyrinth, I think, I crushed my computer for this labyrinth, so I wanted to show it to you. Can we see the next one? That one's even more dramatic, that you are. In fact, it reminds me a little bit of a labyrinth in Berlin for the Holocaust labyrinth, but I didn't choose it for that. It just very much shows you that if you're in there, it's dark and you don't know a way out. There is one, or there may not be one, but you can't access it. The next one. There's a story of Borges called The Library of Babel. I'm sure you've all heard of it. And this is a lovely illustration of that concept of the Library of Babel. And you can't see the hexagons, but they are hexagons that multiply infinitely. So you have, again, something very geometric, a hexagon, but if you multiply it ad infinitum, it becomes a chaos and not an order. In these hexagons, there are books, and there is the idea of, is the meaning in one of these books, and how can we get at it? It's a very complex, it's the story from which this comes, the universe, which others call the library. It's called The Library of Babel, and perhaps we'll read it some stage, or perhaps you would like to read it. But it is it's one of his most abstract stories, but the one that really epitomizes his idea of the library and books, and what's in books, and what can be found in books, and how to interpret books. Next one. Good God, is it 6:10? Andrea?
Yes, almost.
Almost. How much longer have I got? Sorry.
Oh, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me and I can't hear you, but can you, 5 minutes?
No, keep going. I don't think
Sorry.
we have so many slides left, so keep going, Evie, don't worry.
Okay, just go like that if I see you. Okay. Okay, intertextual, because I can go forever and ever. Intertextuality means the relationship of all texts to each other. And when we talked about the literary universe, there is also a concept that all literature is related to each other. That there is one or text, and everything is just a rewriting of that text, or a re-elaboration of that text. The multi-layered text means that his texts are, you can read them, as I said before, you can read them at the level of plot, and the plots are lovely and intriguing and fun, and they capture you as a plot, or humor, or postmodernism, or philosophy, or whatever. So in each text, there are multi-layers of possibilities of reading. And my last one is the open text, and that is that every text is open to even further. There is no closure to a Borges story. You've never actually said there is no other interpretation. You could say that about other writers, but not as fruitfully as here. There's one word, the palimpsest. I don't know whether that is a common usage word, but the palimpsest was the idea of the a manuscript on parchment, and there was layers of the previous parchment below, and then you wrote on top of that. And that is a bit his idea of writing, that you write on the traces of previous writings and you write something new. And then there'll be somebody else who will write on top of your palimpsest. Okay. Can we go? Yeah. Obviously, every writer, serious writer, intellectual writer, whatever, wants to search for meaning. And Borges does that in a detective, uses the detective story for this. And he writes a subversive detective story. The traditional detective story, you have order, somebody is murdered, a detective comes in, investigates, solves the crime, and we come back to order. Mm. If you look at any detective story, or go, Agatha Christie's on a loop on television, whatever, that's the detective story. A Borges story, it doesn't do that. It starts with order, it does with disorder, a murder, the pursuit of it, and then you do not come back to order, but you come back to another order, a different order, an order that does away with the original order. Death and the Compass is one such story, where there is an original crime, somebody's murdered, and it's a mystic who is, somebody dabbling in Kabbalah and mysticism. So two detectives are called in. One says, oh, they got him by mistake. They thought it was the jewels of the fellow next door. And the other one says, no, there has to be a metaphysical answer. And he goes into that. And then you go the trajectory of the common sense answer and the metaphysical answer. And I'll give it away. The metaphysical, the common detective was right. They made a mistake, and then it goes on from there. The other one lets know that he's looking for a metaphysical answer. So the criminal builds on that and makes a series of other crimes for this detective to follow them and to be clever and find out where they go. And obviously, eventually he finds out where they go. And I'm sure you've all guessed it. He finds the right moment, the right crime, the right everything, but it is to trap him, and he's killed. So that's Death and the Compass. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. Can we go to the next one? Okay. I don't know whether you think of Borges as a philosophical writer or a writer of philosophy or whatever, but if you do, it's wrong. He's not a philosophical writer. He doesn't write about philosophy because there is no systematic pursuit of a philosophical idea in his work. He takes philosophical ideas for what they can offer as in a plot or as a component of fiction. So it is, he uses them for what they do, for as he puts somewhere else, as theology, metaphysics, and religion as branches of the literature of the fantastic. I'll just repeat that because there's a bit much to take in. So they're not serious topics in themselves, absolutes, or they are not something that deal with truths for Borges, but they are something that gives him the ideas for a story. There's no systematic pursuit. It's just what he says is under the thing of what if this or that philosophical system were true. Mm-hmm. So whenever you come with a philosophy, it is what the story is, what if this were true, then this would follow. And you're bound to have, but it isn't true, so it doesn't really follow. And I had a thing here. Points to bring. No, I think I've done all that. Okay. Next one. can we go? Oh, you got it here. Yeah, yeah. So some controversial phrases. Religion, metaphysics, philosophy as branches of the literature of fantasy. Now, that has normally been taken that he as a disparaging remark, but it isn't a disparaging remark about them in such. It's just disparaging in their truth claims. But to be branches of the literature of fantasy is something that Borges values very much, the literature of fantasy. The literature of fantasy is one way to approach at a truth. Another phrase that you may have heard of is each writer creates his own precursors. And by that he means that once somebody has written something, you then see traces of what this person has written in those who came before him. The essay in which this is developed is called Kafka and His Precursors. And he says, once Kafka has written, we see these Kafkaesque elements in the literature that came before him. It wasn't there until he wrote it. So you can see how this ties in with the idea that things are there when you make them be there. One element Kafka, I don't know whether this has got into this one here, but Borges shares with Kafka and very few other writers the honor, the glory, the renown of being an adjective. Kafka is an adjective, Kafkaesque was given rise to an adjective, and Borges is one, Borgesian, although not everybody, some editors won't allow Borgesian because they think it's lazy, but it isn't lazy. It's a very good short, and Borgesian has certain qualities, which I hope by the end of this talk you'll be able to fill out for yourself. Another controversial sentence of his is to speak is to fall into tautology. That is to say that it links to what we said about parchment and about intertextuality, but that you're repeating, you're just saying in a different way. And every argument should have its counter argument, so that we don't have absolutism. Everything is put in relativized. When I say relativized, I know it's not very fashionable to talk about absolute relativism, but we will deal with that when we come to a story. Otherwise, I'll never get there. And I'm coming to the end now, but not really, because there's some signature fictions. Would you like me to say a few words about these fictions?
Yes.
Yes? Yeah, okay. Well, the first one, this was the first fiction of Borges that I read. I was, as I said before, in my late teens, The Circular Ruins, and I still feel the shiver that ran down my spine, and although it's a cliche, but it did do that when I came to the end. And basically, it is about a man, and he happens to be grey and a wizard, and nobody sees him. These are all little clues that you then learn to appreciate. He comes down, descends from a boat onto a river, a city by sort of an abandoned place by the river, and there is an abandoned temple there, and he settles there, and then he gets lonely, and his dream is to have a son. So slowly he dreams a son, and at one moment the son in his dream, the drenched son awoke. En el sueño el soñado se despertó. And then he's got the son, and the son then eventually wants to be independent, goes down river, and he goes and he's left alone, and there is a fire, and the protagonist, the wizard, whatever, walks through the fire, and he realizes that the fire doesn't touch him, he doesn't burn, he doesn't feel it, and the branches of the riverbed don't hurt him. So he realizes that he is someone else's dream. So one dream engendering another. These dreams can be fiction, they can be this or that, but he makes it so alive that you really feel for this person who's created his son and then realize that he is but a creation. Emma Soons is the one that I chose if anyone still wants to come back for next week. And it's a story that
Time.
never, sorry?
2 weeks' time.
Sorry, I meant next week in the fairly Leon sense. Yes, yeah. In 2 weeks' time. And she is, she seeks revenge for the death of her father. She receives a letter that her father has died, and she sees a story of vengeance. And it's a wonderful, wonderfully complex story. I won't give any more away other than that she has a plan, and the plan is to have sex with someone, and then I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at that. But when you read it very, very carefully. That I wanted to have something as Borges and coronavirus, and I thought, no, it was a little bit far-fetched and opportunistic. But there is something about Borges and coronavirus, and that is that we now all have infinite time. So Borges' stories have to be read slowly and often, and now we have the leisure for that. So something good comes out of it. Funes the Memorias is about a fellow who falls off the horse, a horse, and in falling does something to himself so that he has paralysis. He lays on a bed, paralytic, but his memory is total, and his vision is total, and it's this sight of plenitude, and he can see not just a leaf, but the way in which the sapia, the I can't think of it now, in a leaf grows. What? Again, you can't tell me. And he has this sort of enormously intimate vision, and the fact that he has the vision of everything means he can't generalize. So we read that one as well. The Garden of Forking Paths is a metaphor that of a different metaphor of the universe. Normally, with every path you take, you leave others behind. But in this Garden of Forking Paths, all the paths exist at the same time. The ones in the past, the present, and the ones that are to come. It's a little bit like the vision of plenitude there. And well, I won't go further. It's a complex story with the Chinese, and it starts with history of the World War I. So it starts with a very precise moment in history, and then we go into this huge metaphysical universe. Pierre Bernard I've said a little bit about. The theme of the hero and the traitor is another very lovely story. It's known as one of the two Irish stories. And it's about somebody who wants to write the biography of his grandfather, who was a hero. And in doing his research, he finds that his grandfather was not the hero and the martyr the hero of his martyred death, but he was actually a traitor who was forced to presented as a hero and forced to die as a martyr in order to advance the cause that he had betrayed. I hope that's clear. And in doing that, it has echoes of Macbeth, echoes of Julius Caesar, the past, but also forebodings of the death of Abraham Lincoln. So it goes into the past and the future. And the secret miracle is too lovely. I won't tell you about that now. It's too late. I don't want you to hear it in a hurry. It's a wonderful, lovely, lovely story. I think that's all. Thank you very much indeed.